Hey, welcome back to theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Again, theclinicaltrialsguru.com. It's also theclinicaltrials.guru. I just snatched up that domain. So, just trying to make it easier for you guys to find me, and whether you're watching on YouTube, because I'm a firm believer in being everywhere. So, you may be watching on YouTube, you may be watching on the actual blog, you may be listening on iTunes, you may be listening on Stitcher, whatever it is, however you like to consume the content. I just care that you find it valuable, interesting, informative, sometimes entertaining. Um, Hopefully, you guys enjoy what you're watching. And keep your questions coming. Dan at theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Dan at theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Get your questions answered by someone who is an industry insider, and that is me. The site is the Guru, but that's kind of a tongue-in-cheek. I really hate people who claim to be gurus, and I'm definitely not a know-it-all when it comes to this industry. I'm still learning a lot as I go myself. But I bring on guests. I bring on guests like Darshan Kulkarni. I bring on guests like Craig Lipset. I bring on guests like Patrick Stone. I bring on guests like Barbara Duck. All kinds of people, CRAs, people from Sponsor, people from IRBs, people from EDC, electronic data capture companies, research clinics, even study participants. So hopefully you guys find some of this informative. Today's podcast, and I don't know if it'll be a full podcast, it might. I'm going to go through some viewer questions. And I'm also going to get into some topics that I thought were important to cover when it comes to clinical research recruitment. And I have a book out. It's $2.99 on Kindle, How to Recruit More Clinical Trial Study Participants. So with that being said, we'll get right into it. And I got one question from a guy who shall remain anonymous. And he's asking about what does it mean when someone says standard of care costs. So can you explain when a sponsor talks about standard of care costs and what that means? And I'm trying to dissect this topic here into subcategories. So basically you'll encounter this question from a sponsor, and a lot of it has to do with the Sunshine Act, and I've done tons of posts on the Sunshine Act. So just on my blog, just look up Sunshine Act, and you'll find tons of information that I have about the Sunshine Act. Okay, what does it mean when a sponsor talks about standard of care costs? So you'll encounter this when you're doing a budget and you're trying to negotiate, and everything's a negotiation process. And what I've recently learned, which I don't know if I necessarily believe, is that the CROs don't really care about negotiating the budget. That's not where they make their money. They make their money from everything else they bill the sponsors, not what they pay the sites versus what they get reimbursed from the sponsor, and having those thin margins. That's not really where they're making their money. So when it comes to standard of care cost, the Sunshine Act, they're trying to be compliant, and for some reason clinical research is grouped into the category of the Sunshine Act, where each sponsor, each drug company, has to disclose every dollar they give to every doctor that they have business deals with. So whether you speak for Pfizer, whether you are a speaker for Eli Lilly, whether you go give promotions for their drug or lunch and learn seminars and you teach other doctors or educate other doctors on a new drug, or whether you do clinical research, for some reason they categorize that into the same category that falls under the Sunshine Act. So now we have to explain standard of care cost. We have to prove what the standard of care costs are for a particular procedure. So for example, for a physical exam, Whatever Medicare reimburses for a physical exam for that doctor's specialty, that's considered standard of care cost. If Medicare is not good, they usually take an average of insurance reimbursement rates from the top 3 insurance providers in that region, in the area you're in. So for a physical, let's say Medicare reimburses a doctor $80 for a physical. When it comes to a clinical research budget, you're not going to be able to negotiate much more than $80. Now, much more is very subjective, and that doesn't mean you can't negotiate at all. It just means that they have to have you within a range of that standard of care so that it doesn't seem like an enticement. But don't worry about the standard of care costs, because there's still ways to make your profit in research, and that's by doing things like overhead and billing for things that are strictly research specific, like certain rating scales, certain patient procedures are only done in clinical research. You're not going to really see, for example, a perfect example is in schizophrenia. You're not really going to do a PANS, which is a positive and negative symptoms of schizophrenia, traditionally in a private practice of a psychiatrist's office. So there really is no standard of care cost for the PANS. So, because it requires more expertise, you can charge more for these kind of procedures. And every study has these type of procedures where there is no standard of care cost. So that's where you can make your money. That's where you have your leverage. That's where you can negotiate higher budgets. But when it comes to something like a physical or a blood draw or an ECG, you really can't. You can also make your money in the overhead. So I recommend you get a 30% overhead. You have to prove this or justify this with your site overhead budget and just overhead policy. I'm sorry. So on my blog, again, theclinicaltrialsguru.com, I've done videos on this where I've pretty much walk you through how to do your own overhead policy. So just search on my blog for overhead policy and you'll find it. So that's what standard of care cost is. Hopefully that helps. And thanks for your question. Keep it coming, guys. Dan at theclinicaltrialsguru.com. You can also find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. This person actually sent me this question on LinkedIn, which is actually a really good platform to meet other researchers and network with other research clinics and people in the research industry. So, a quick thing on recruitment. So, my book is out, How to Recruit Clinical Trial Study Participants. And I wrote it because I get questions all the time from research clinics of just creative ways to recruit. And I've got all kinds of chapters in there, 16 chapters. I wanted to talk specifically about using Google AdWords. Okay. So, and then there's other things too, like there's Facebook ads, which I talk about in the book as well. But Facebook's evolving. Facebook is constantly evolving. They have something now called dark posts, which I'm very much interested in, and I actually just launched a startup where we recruit for clinics. So you know how you have your budget for advertising, which usually these budgets, if you don't use them, so the sponsor will give you an advertising budget. If you don't use it, you lose it, right? So many sites don't want to go through the hassle of getting their ads IRB approved, and so they end up not using the advertising budgets, which is usually around $4,000 to $5,000 per study. So my startup is going to take your advertising budget. So I'll invoice you, you invoice the sponsor. I'll take care of everything related to the IRB approvals, and we'll start doing Facebook ads, Google ads, Twitter ads, Craigslist, LinkedIn, anything that's appropriate, print, radio. I still believe in traditional media. I just don't believe we should be paying 1990 rates for billboards and radios and TVs in 2014, where when you're driving, everyone's going like this. No one's paying attention to a billboard. Everyone's texting. Or as soon as the TV goes to commercial, you're either TiVoing it or you're DVRing it because no one uses TiVo anymore, and you're fast forwarding the commercials, or you go to your phone and you go like this. So I still believe in traditional media. I think there is a time and place for that. I just don't think we should be paying 1990s rates. So anyways, that's what my startup focuses on. If you're interested in having me help you out with your advertising at no cost to you, zero cost to you, it's part of your advertising budget that the sponsor will reimburse you for. Email me, Dan at theclinicaltrialsguru.com. But anyways, when doing Google AdWords, be very careful, okay? You want to you want to only pay for clicks. So you don't want to pay for impressions, meaning each time your ad shows up, you get charged, because people can ignore those. You want to get paid only when someone clicks on your ad and then lands up on your landing page on your website, which is also another thing that my startup does. Is we'll get in your website, we'll create a landing page on your website for every specific study you're doing. So if you're doing a study for constipation, you'll have a constipation landing page on your website that the ad for constipation will lead to. If you have an asthma study, same thing, we'll have an asthma landing page for you. And we do this no cost to you, absolutely free. So you want to have a landing page, and then you want to do bid on certain words and choose a very, very narrow, like 5-10 mile radius of your clinic. You can do more if you want, but just to play with it and see how it works. And then set a maximum budget. I don't want to spend more than $100 a month. That's typically what I do for my clinics, and we usually get about 5 or 6 screenings out of that every month, which is not bad for $100. And bid on certain keywords, so you can bid on a bunch of different keywords, anything related to your study. So if you have a constipation study, obviously you want to have keywords constipation treatments, constipation cures. Even though I know you nerds out there are telling me research is not a cure, it doesn't matter. People are still searching for these terms, so you want to be where people are searching. Constipation cures, constipation treatments, constipation alternatives, constipation remedies, constipation research, constipation latest. You can just go like really long tail with it, and also limit it to a certain region, let's say 25 mile radius, and that's cost per click. I would do that with Google. Now with some studies, Facebook is better than Google depending on the demographics, although the largest growing demographic on Facebook and on Instagram, by the way, is 40 to 50-year-old women. So just a couple years ago, Facebook used to be just for young people, not anymore. So now Google's pretty much for everyone, although there's studies that show that people under 20, when they Google something, their eyes don't even look at the right side of the screen. So they're trained to already tune out Google AdWords, but Facebook ads might be the new way to go. Facebook dark posts. So my startup actually specializes in that. So that's how you use Google Ads. That's how I would use it for my clinics. It's worked in the past. So hopefully that helps a little bit. And I had one more question I wanted to get into. It's basically for when you go to investigator meetings, okay, how do you become certified for a particular rating scale if you're a rater? And do you have to repeat this process for every study? And the answer, unfortunately, is yes. So for every study, every protocol is different, even though they may use the same different rating scales. And this is a good question. I don't think I've ever covered it before. But for someone who doesn't work in the industry, it's not obvious. So yes, you do have to get recertified, unfortunately, for every single study that you do, even though the procedures are the same. Sometimes, however, if you're using the same vendor, so the company that actually certified you, if they're also the vendor on another study, you can usually get certified again without having to go through that entire process. So they are getting better at that. Hopefully that answers your question. And there was a couple more, but I think I'll save those for another day. So this is a really short podcast or a really long YouTube video, depending on how you want to look at it. But thank you guys for watching. Thank you for sending your questions. Give a shout out to my clinical trial guru producers, South Coast Clinical Trials, Sarah Elizabeth Siegler, Resolve Research Solutions, Accurate Clinical Trials, PTNR, Earnhardt Clinical Research, Tradestone LLC, Breakthrough Clinical Trials, Kulkarni Law Firm, Biopharma Systems, Zymewire, Mosio, St. Paul Medical Research Center, Investigator Research Group, Phlebotomy Services, Adria Clinical Research Management, Rheumatic Disease Clinical Research Center, Clinexus Research LLC, Coastal Connecticut Research LLC. Thank you guys very much. Dan from theclinicaltrialsguru.com, and until next time, take care.